Welcome to the deep dive, where we take complex source material, from legal documents to scientific papers, and provide you with the shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in the story of a company whose products you likely touched 5 times before you even finished breakfast.
We're talking about 3M, the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, and the sheer ubiquity of their products is just, staggering.
It really is. They are responsible for over 60,000 different products, which is a number that's hard to even get your head around. It spans the industrial world, healthcare, and your kitchen cabinet.
Right, you think of the iconic household names, Scotch tape, Post-it notes, but their reach is so much deeper. We're also talking critical safety infrastructure like N95 respirators and really cutting-edge industrial materials.
Exactly. This company literally touches almost every aspect of modern life.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because on one hand, 3M is, the definition of American innovation. It's a story of serendipitous discovery, rapid scaling, and technological mastery.
But on the other hand, and this is the core of our deep dive today, 3M now finds itself grappling with some of the most expensive and long-lasting environmental and personal injury liabilities in global corporate history.
That duality is really the mission of this deep dive, isn't it?
It is. We are going to trace 3M's century-plus trajectory, how a business founded on a, frankly, disastrous mining blunder transformed into a legendary innovation machine.
And then, crucially, we have to examine the colossal controversies, the staggering financial and human costs associated with both Forever Chemicals, or PFAS, and then the military earplug lawsuits.
To set the stage, let's just establish the sheer scale of this entity. As of 2024, 3M, founded way back in 1902, remains this global industrial conglomerate headquartered in Maplewood, Minnesota.
And it's a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500, which, that signifies its fundamental role in the U.S. economy. This isn't some niche company.
Not at all. They employ approximately 61,500 people globally. And while recent settlements have been incredibly costly, their foundation is still strong. 2024 revenues were reported at $24.58 billion.
Wow. So when a company of that size, that established, faces financial liabilities totaling tens of billions of dollars, it has to profoundly alter its future.
It changes everything. It changes their corporate strategy, which is exactly what we are seeing today.
So let's start at the beginning. The narrative of 3M truly begins with what can only be described as a foundational mistake.
Oh, absolutely. It's perhaps the least auspicious start for a company that would eventually define modern office supplies.
It's one of the great accidental success stories in American business, isn't it? Born entirely from an error in geological assessment.
Completely. The company was founded on June 13, 1902 in Two Harbors, Minnesota. The 5 businessmen founders, people like John Dwan and William A. McGonigal, had one specific goal. They wanted to mine corundum.
Corundum. For those of us who aren't geologists, what exactly is that?
It's aluminum oxide. It's a super hard crystalline mineral, and it's prized specifically for its use in abrasives.
So, sandpaper. They wanted to make sandpaper.
That was the entire plan. It was supposed to be the raw material for their manufacturing. The problem was the mineral holdings they had purchased, the land they based their entire business plan on.
It wasn't corundum.
It was commercially worthless. They didn't have corundum. What they actually had was anorthosite, which is a type of feldspar.
And feldspar is not good for sandpaper.
Far too soft. It's completely useless as an effective industrial abrasive. So the mining part of Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing had failed before it even properly began.
Incredible. So facing the sudden reality that their core asset, their whole reason for existing, was useless, how did they survive those first few years?
That immediate pivot is what defined their future culture. It really defined their survival.
Yeah.
They had to pivot entirely away from resource extraction to becoming a manufacturing company focused on products.
So they moved.
They moved to Duluth, focused intensely on just getting a viable sandpaper product to market, even if it meant they had to source the raw abrasive minerals from somewhere else. And this stabilization was agonizingly slow.
How slow are we talking here?
14 years. It took until 1916 for the company to achieve the financial stability necessary to pay a single dividend to its investors.
Wow.
Yeah. The key leadership that navigated this early turmoil included William L. McKnight, who joined in 1907, initially as just an accountant, and A.G. Bush, who came aboard in 1909.
And these are the guys who get credit for the culture, right? The famous 3M innovation culture.
They're the ones. They're credited with instilling the philosophy that failure was part of the process, pushing for continuous product development and R&D.
The culture McKnight fostered became legendary. I mean, it encouraged employees to dedicate a portion of their time to projects outside their direct assignments. That's the famous 15% time rule, isn't it?
That's the one. It's often cited as the key to 3M's innovation prowess. They moved the headquarters to St. Paul in 1910, before eventually moving to that expansive 3M center in Maplewood in 1962, a move just necessitated by their explosive growth.
And once that R&D culture was in place, especially in the mid-20th century, 3M just became this giant innovation engine.
And so much of that engine was fueled by accidents. Serendipity. It's a word you just have to use over and over again when you're talking about 3M.
Okay, let's talk about the most famous example of that chemical serendipity, the one that led to a whole product line. Scotchgard. What was the accidental origin there?
Scotchgard is the perfect illustration of capitalizing on a mistake. It was discovered in 1952 by two brilliant chemists, Passy Sherman and Samuel Smith.
And they weren't trying to invent a stain repellent, were they?
Not even close. They were trying to develop a new type of rubber for aviation fuel lines.
So what happened?
Well, a bottle containing one of the potential intermediate chemicals fell over, and it splashed onto a lab technician's canvas sneaker.
The classic lab accident.
The classic lab accident. And Sherman noticed that the spot where the chemical had splashed repelled water, it repelled oil, it repelled any solvent they tried to clean it with. It was impervious to everything.
That's fascinating. So they immediately recognized that the material's failure to do its job.
Was actually a brilliant success for a completely different purpose.
Surface protection.
Precisely. They had accidentally stumbled upon the properties of fluorochemicals, which, when applied to fabrics, created this invisible shield. Sales of Scotchgard, a powerful water repellent and stain protector, began as early as 1956, and the patent was eventually received in 1973.
And this ability to sort of weaponize unintended chemical properties became 3M's superpower.
It did, and as we're going to see, it was also the root cause of its most devastating liabilities.
Right. It wasn't just consumer chemicals, though. 3M showed remarkable adaptability by expanding into these specialized high-margin areas like healthcare pretty early on.
Their entry into healthcare was very strategic. They produced the first asthma inhaler in the late 1950s, using their expertise in material science and delivery systems.
And that was followed by an acquisition.
Yes, the acquisition of Riker Laboratories in the mid-1960s. That was a move that significantly broadened their footprint in the entire pharmaceutical industry.
And their commitment to adaptation was tested on a global scale later on, wasn't it? They had to respond to the massive international regulatory agreement, the Montreal Protocol.
The one designed to phase out ozone-depleting substances.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of the older asthma inhalers used chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, as a propellant. In response to the protocol, 3M Pharmaceuticals successfully developed the first CFC-free asthma inhaler in the mid-1990s.
And that highlights a really crucial theme here, right? 3M is capable of adapting its chemistry to meet global environmental regulations when the issue is clear and regulated, like ozone depletion.
That is a very key point. Their pharmaceutical development also produced some really specialized results, too, before they decided to get out of that business entirely.
What kind of results?
Well, they invested heavily in developing topical drug delivery technology. This is a 15-year project that eventually yielded Aldara, which was a symptomatic treatment cream for genital warts. It received regulatory approval in 1997.
So it proved they could do long-horizon drug R&D. But the pharma sector ultimately didn't align with their core mission.
No, their core mission was material science, so they walked away from a potentially lucrative but really resource-intensive line of business.
And the ultimate divestment of that whole pharmaceutical unit, that happened in 2006.
Correct. It was done via 3 separate deals, and it generated more than $2 billion for 3M. At the time of the sale, that division was about a fifth of 3M's overall healthcare business, but it freed up a lot of capital and management focus.
To pursue other things like advanced wound care and medical device technology.
Things they later doubled down on. Exactly.
And while they were inventing life-saving inhalers and complex topical creams, their material science expertise was also kind of intersecting with pop culture in these truly unexpected ways.
It's the sheer breadth of the product line that gets you. I mean, they had these niche, highly specialized offerings like Nextel Simulated Blood. It was a theatrical blood formula.
Okay, that's not what I expected. So this wasn't just, corn syrup and red dye.
No, not at all. This was based on red, color-fast microbeads suspended in a carrier liquid. It was a high-tech solution.
Why was that specific formulation so important? What problem did it solve?
It didn't stain. That was the magic. Traditional stage blood, which is made of dyes and sugar syrup, it stains costumes and sets permanently. 3M's material science created blood that looked entirely realistic on camera.
It was famously used in George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, right? 1978.
That's the one. And it could be washed out completely. It's just a marvelous application of advanced chemistry to solve a simple, practical problem, though the product itself has since been discontinued.
The ultimate simple problem they solved, of course, was temporary information organization, which led to the Post-it note. And this product has a legendary launch history defined by, well, rejection.
It's the perfect story of market resistance to innovation. The concept originated from two separate internal efforts. You had one chemist, Spencer Silver, who invented a low-tack, repositionable adhesive in 1968, but he couldn't find a use for it.
So he invented a solution without a problem.
Exactly. And the other part came from Art Fry, a 3M product developer. He was frustrated that the paper bookmarks he used in his hymn book kept falling out during choir practice.
And he put the two together. He realized Silver's temporary adhesive could hold his bookmarks in place without damaging the paper. But when 3M tried to launch it commercially, it just failed.
It failed spectacularly at first. They launched it in 1977 as press and peel, sticky bookmark page holders in 4 initial cities, and the consumer response was just disappointing.
Why? What was the issue?
The marketing team struggled to explain the utility of an adhesive that wasn't permanent. I mean, consumers had no framework for a product that was designed to stick temporarily.
Yeah.
It went against everything they knew about glue.
The brilliance lay in recognizing that it was a marketing problem, not a product problem. How did they solve that?
They shifted their strategy completely. In 1978, they did massive consumer testing via a free sample campaign in Boise, Idaho. They essentially bypassed the retail sales pitch and just let people use the product in their daily lives.
Put it in their hands.
Exactly. And that campaign proved the concept almost immediately.
It changed everything.
It really did. Of those who received free samples and integrated them into their work or home life, 95% indicated they would absolutely buy the product.
Wow, 95%. That's an unbelievable number.
It's a marketer's dream. That data confirmed the value. So the product, marketed simply as Post-its, began its U.S. rollout in 1980, and it expanded to Canada and Europe the very next year. This truly cemented 3M's reputation. They didn't just invent materials, they invented entire product categories.
That story of accidental discovery and relentless market testing is really the heart of 3M's success. But as we transition to our second major section, we have to recognize that the same brilliance in fluorochemistry that gave us Scotch Guard
And allowed us to repel stains.
also gave us the world's most persistent environmental pollutant.
And now we enter the shadow, cast by 3M's chemical expertise. The story of per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, is the story of technological triumph meeting environmental catastrophe.
Let's start with the chemical origin story, because this is where the genius and the danger truly collide. We're talking about the production of PFOA, or perfluorooctanoic acid.
Right. 3M began producing PFOA way back in 1947 using a novel process called electrochemical fluorination. And PFOA itself, it's not the final product most consumers would know. It was an absolutely critical industrial surfactant and chemical feedstock, a processing aid.
And the most important customer for this processing aid was DuPont for their blockbuster product.
Teflon. Precisely. DuPont purchased PFOA from 3M. They refer to it internally as C8, specifically to manufacture Teflon.
So PFOA was the secret ingredient.
It was the essential chemical that allowed DuPont to synthesize the polytetrafluoroethylene that formed that nonstick coating. By the 1990s, Teflon was generating billions in profit for DuPont, all of it enabled by 3M's underlying chemical.
Okay, so we have PFOA as the key manufacturing aid, and then we have its cousin, PFOS, perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, which was used in 3M's own products like Scotch Guard, and also firefighting foams.
AFFF, aqueous film-forming foam. Yes. These two chemicals are the most famous examples of the broader PFAS group.
And this is the technical detail that I think really matters for the deep dive listener. Why are they called forever chemicals? The answer is in the bond, right?
It's all about the carbon-fluorine bond, the CF bond.
What makes that bond so special and so problematic?
Well, to put it simply, the CF bond is the strongest single bond in organic chemistry. It requires an immense amount of energy to break. This bond structure is what gives PFAS their desirable properties. They're extremely resistant to heat, oil, and water.
Which is fantastic for nonstick pans and stain-repellent clothing.
For a time, yes. But because that bond is so strong, they do not break down naturally. They're non-biodegradable.
Meaning they just accumulate?
They accumulate in the environment, in groundwater, and critically, in the human body, they persist. Hence the name, forever chemicals.
And that permanence is what links them to a whole host of serious health problems.
Yes, things like developmental issues, high cholesterol, reduced immune response, ulcerative colitis, and various forms of cancer.
The environmental reckoning for this began in 1999, which feels relatively late given the decades of production.
It was late. In 1999, the EPA started investigating perfluorinated chemicals after data began to emerge about their global distribution and their toxicity. The scrutiny hit 3M hard.
And it led them to announce a massive voluntary phase-out.
Yes, in May 2000, they announced they would stop producing PFOS and PFOA along with related products. It was a huge move and really an acknowledgement of the severity of the emerging scientific evidence.
But of course, stopping production doesn't stop the spread of chemicals that have been dumped or released for 50 years. The contamination case in Minnesota, 3M's home state, is the starkest early example of this.
The Minnesota contamination near their Cottage Grove facility is a classic industrial pollution case. 3M had manufactured PFAS there from the 1940s all the way until they ceased production in 2002.
And the crucial oversight, the big problem, was the water treatment.
The on-site water treatment facility, while effective for many pollutants, was simply not designed or equipped to remove PFAS molecules. They're too stable.
So those persistent chemicals flowed directly into the environment.
Straight into the Mississippi River and the surrounding lands. The state later documented extensive groundwater and drinking water contamination in the East Metro area. Initially, 3M established a $147 million environmental reserve fund in 2006.
And they estimated cleanup costs at around $50 to $56 million.
Which, in hindsight, was just the very beginning.
The true financial liability arrived when the state of Minnesota took a much harder line.
They did. In late 2010, the state filed a major lawsuit against 3M, and they were seeking $5 billion in punitive damages over the release of PFCs into local waterways.
And that legal battle went on for years.
It dragged on for 8 years. It finally settled in February 2018 for a final figure of $850 million.
$850 million.
And that settlement was specifically earmarked for water cleanup and resource restoration in the contaminated areas. That figure, $850 million, that should have been a massive alarm bell for investors about the scale of the pending liability.
And yet, despite that immense factual payout, 3M's public messaging to lawmakers, their official stance on the danger of these chemicals, remained highly contentious.
That's a massive contradiction in corporate strategy, isn't it? In 2019, key executives from 3M, Chemours, and DuPont appeared before Congress, and a 3M senior VP of Corporate Affairs, Denise Rutherford, publicly denied that the chemicals posed human health threats at current environmental levels.
She said there were no victims.
Stated it emphatically, which is just, it's a difficult position to understand.
How can a major corporation maintain a stance of no victims when they have already paid nearly $1 billion to remedy the environmental consequences of those very chemicals?
Well, it speaks to a strategy focused on limiting future litigation and maintaining shareholder confidence. You minimize the perceived health risk, even while you're simultaneously funding environmental litigation.
But the scientific and legal dam broke completely just 4 years later.
It did. We have to talk about the 2023 agreement. This is what truly defined the crisis for 3M on a national level.
The 2023 settlement was monumental because it resolved thousands of individual lawsuits.
Lawsuits brought by public water systems all across the United States. 3M agreed to pay a $10.3 billion settlement.
$10.3 billion.
And that money is dedicated to testing, monitoring, and treating contaminated public drinking water supplies nationwide.
So this isn't just about contamination near their plants anymore. This is a national public infrastructure crisis funded by 3M because of the widespread use of products like those firefighting foams that contain PFAS.
Exactly. The sheer number of plaintiffs, thousands of water systems. It demonstrates the pervasive nature of PFAS pollution across the entire country, not just Minnesota. This settlement forced 3M to confront the reality that its chemical legacy was effectively a multi-decade deferred tax on modern infrastructure.
And this chemical shadow is truly global. The impact was dramatically highlighted in Europe, specifically around 3M's facilities in Belgium.
Right. The situation at the Zwijndrecht factory near Antwerp in Belgium in 2021 proved that this pollution is a massive global issue. Extensive research revealed PFOS pollution from the facility was contaminating agricultural products within a 15-kilometer radius.
An area that includes highly populated parts of Antwerp.
Yes. And the public health measures that were implemented were incredibly strict, reflecting the severity of the contamination.
The Flemish government had to take pretty drastic action.
They did. They had to advise residents against the consumption of homegrown eggs within a 5-kilometer radius of the facility because of the levels of PFOS they were finding.
And what was 3M's contribution to that cleanup?
Well, 3M contributed €75,000 for initial cleanup and remediation. But the financial burden placed on the Flemish government was immense. They had to spend €63 million on cleanup costs up to that point.
The disparity is just shocking. A €63 million societal cost versus a €75,000 initial contribution from the corporate entity.
This incredible gap between the immediate cost of production and the long-term exponential cost of cleaning up persistence, that is the defining feature of 3M's chemical liability story.
It really shows that when chemical innovation bypasses proper long-term regulatory oversight, the public ultimately bears the primary financial burden, even if the corporation eventually steps in with a large settlement years or decades later.
Absolutely.
So the immense financial damage caused by these legacy environmental products forced 3M to confront another parallel liability crisis, this time involving the profound failure of safety equipment designed to protect U.S. troops.
We're moving into the realm of the combat arms earplugs controversy. This became an enormous source of personal injury litigation, targeting 3M's role as a supplier of critical military safety gear.
Okay, let's outline the product and the context here. We're discussing the combat arms earplugs, version 2, the CAEV2.
And these were developed by Aero Technologies, which was a company 3M acquired in 2008. So they inherited the liability for the product.
And this product was not niche, it was standard issue for over a decade.
Standard issue. It was provided to U.S. military personnel deployed between 2003 and 2015. They were designed to be dual-ended. One side for regular continuous noise protection, and the other side, usually yellow, was for filtering out intense impulse noises like explosions and gunfire, while still allowing the user to hear verbal commands.
A clever design, in theory. But the core of the problem lay in a design defect that rendered that impulse noise protection ineffective.
That's the key technical failure. The allegation, which was later supported by court evidence, was that the yellow end of the earplug was subtly too short.
Too short to get a good seal.
Exactly. And more importantly, the seal flange was designed in such a way that it could loosen imperceptibly over time, or just fail to achieve a tight seal when inserted into the ear canal, especially during intense physical activity or jaw movement.
So if that seal was compromised, what was the real-world consequence for the user in a combat zone?
It meant the earplug would gradually slacken, and that would allow the high-decibel noise from explosions, machine guns, or heavy machinery to leak past the plug and damage the inner ear.
The user believes they're protected, but the defense is completely compromised.
And that leads directly to permanent, debilitating damage.
The whole controversy started when a competitor exposed the alleged defect.
Correct. In May 2016, a competitor, Moldex Metric, filed a whistleblower complaint under the False Claims Act. They alleged that 3M, and Aero before it, had not only made false claims to the U.S. government about the earplug's performance,
but also that the company had internal knowledge of the defective design.
And knew about the necessary modifications to correct it.
That initial government investigation resulted in a relatively small settlement, but one that paved the way for the massive individual lawsuits that followed.
3M settled the False Claims Act allegations with the U.S. Department of Justice in 2018 for $9.1 million. It didn't admit liability, which is key.
Standard practice.
But the settlement confirmed the government's serious concern about the claims. And that governmental resolution immediately opened the door for veterans, who were the true victims, to file their own personal injury claims.
And the floodgates just opened wide after that, didn't they? The scale of the resulting litigation is historically unprecedented for a safety product.
It's staggering. Since 2018, over 140,000 former users of the CAEV2 earplugs, primarily U.S. military veterans, have filed lawsuits.
140,000 people.
Yes. They claim that the defective product resulted in permanent hearing loss and, most commonly, severe tinnitus, a chronic, debilitating ringing in the ears. The Pensacola court overseeing this litigation became the largest multi-district litigation, or MDL, in U.S. history.
And the internal communications that were revealed during the trial made the whole controversy look far worse than just a simple design flaw.
This point is critical because it speaks to corporate intent. Internal emails, introduced as evidence, showed 3M officials boasting about the profit margin on the earplugs.
How much were they charging?
They were charging the government $7.63 per piece for earplugs that cost only 85 cents to manufacture.
Wow. Now, 3M claimed that price included R&D and distribution costs?
They did. But the appearance of prioritizing profit over product integrity, especially for safety equipment intended for combat troops, was highly, highly damaging.
So this wasn't just a product failure, it was a profound failure of safety standards provided to the most critical personnel, and it resulted in permanent damage that fundamentally altered their post-service lives. What was the final resolution?
Well, the liability exposure just became too immense to manage through individual jury trials. So in August 2023, 3M agreed to pay a massive $6 billion settlement to resolve these lawsuits.
$6 billion. So when you factor in the $10.3 billion PFAS settlement and the $6 billion earplug settlement, 3M has committed over $16 billion to settling legacy product liabilities within a very short time frame.
$16.3 billion to be exact. It's a staggering commitment of capital, and it profoundly changes the strategic landscape for the company.
Okay, let's pivot to another safety product where 3M's role was suddenly under a global spotlight, but for very different reasons. The N95 respirator.
Right. The N95 mask is another triumph of 3M's material science. It was developed and received approval way back in 1972, long before viral pandemics were a global concern. It's an effective particulate filter respirator, filtering at least 95% of airborne particles.
But when COVID-19 hit in early 2020, the N95 instantly became the most essential and the most scarce piece of personal protective equipment on the planet.
And the crisis revealed the fragility of global supply chains and the danger of relying on just a few specialized manufacturers. 3M, being the dominant producer, faced immediate and extreme demand that just far outstripped its current production capacity.
This scarcity led directly to a high-level, very politicized dispute with the U.S. government.
It did. President Trump invoked the Defense Production Act, the DPA, which is a measure typically reserved for wartime, to compel 3M to prioritize federal orders.
And beyond that, the administration explicitly requested that 3M stop exporting U.S.-made N95 respirators to Canada and to countries in Latin America to focus solely on domestic supply.
That created immediate international tension, especially with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, who rely so heavily on cross-border supply chains.
So how was that resolved? It showed the flexibility of 3M's global network, right?
It did. Rather than halt exports entirely, 3M agreed to significantly increase the importation of respirators into the U.S., primarily utilizing the massive manufacturing capacity of its factories in China.
So that allowed them to meet the urgent federal demand without completely severing supply to their international customers.
Exactly. And to address the long-term vulnerability of relying on foreign supply, 3M also made commitments to bolster production right here in North America.
Right, I remember that. In Canada, 3M struck a deal, a $70 million deal, with the federal and provincial Ontario governments to produce N95 masks at their existing plant in Brockville, Ontario.
This crisis demonstrated 3M's unique, critical role as a supplier of foundational national defense and public health infrastructure. It forced them to navigate these complex ethical, economic, and geopolitical pressures really instantaneously.
It is truly remarkable that one company can simultaneously be navigating multi-billion-dollar lawsuits over defective earplugs and forever chemicals, while also being forced by presidential order to reroute life-saving masks during a pandemic. That level of complexity has to necessitate dramatic changes in corporate strategy.
The financial weight of these massive liabilities, combined with the ongoing need to remain competitive, has profoundly shaped 3M's strategy. But, adaptation and restructuring have always been core to their business model.
They have a long history of adapting by shedding declining business sectors, right, to maintain efficiency and appeal to Wall Street analysts who are looking for that high-growth potential.
The classic early example was the 1996 spin-off of their data storage and imaging divisions into a new company, Illumination Corporation. This included their photographic film, printing products, and removable storage media businesses.
All sectors facing a long-term decline because of the digital revolution.
Exactly. That move was strategically genius at the time.
How so? What were the numbers?
Illumination represented about 20% of 3M's total sales, employees, and product lines. But, and this is the crucial part, it accounted for only about 5% of 3M's profits.
So by spinning it off, 3M immediately improved its profitability margins and its valuation.
Instantly. They refocused the company on higher-margin industrial and specialty businesses. It was a textbook case of shedding sunset industries.
And the 21st century has seen this strategy continue, focusing on acquiring high-growth, specialized safety and health firms while simultaneously shedding those non-core assets.
Absolutely. On the acquisition side, they've doubled down on safety and health. In 2017, they acquired Scott Safety for $2 billion. And then in 2019, they made an enormous commitment to advanced wound care, acquiring Acelity and its KCI subsidiaries for a massive $6.7 billion.
And the divestiture side ran in parallel. They sold their library systems unit in 2015.
And they continued to refine their portfolio. They sold substantially all of their drug delivery business in 2020 for about $650 million. Most recently, they merged their food safety business with Neogen in 2022, a complex deal with an enterprise value of about $5.3 billion.
All of this constant movement reflects a focused effort to optimize their portfolio around their remaining core groups,
Which are safety and industrial, transportation and electronics, healthcare, and consumer products.
The biggest strategic move in years, however, is a July 2022 announcement regarding their healthcare division. This is dramatically changing the corporate landscape.
This is a profound defining shift. The decision to spin off their entire healthcare assets into a new, independent, publicly traded firm called Solventum Corporation.
And the transaction is designed so that 3M retains a minority ownership stake initially.
Yes, 19.9% in Solventum, which they plan to divest gradually over time.
So for the learner, why spin off such a massive, generally successful business unit? Is this a financial move to unlock shareholder value, or is it a defensive move to shield those high-growth assets from the shadow of the PFAS and earplug liabilities?
It's generally interpreted as a combination of both. Analysts suggest a spin-off creates a pure-play medical device and technology company, Solventum, whose market valuation might otherwise be depressed by the parent company's multi-billion-dollar litigation overhang.
So Solventum can attract investors who are only interested in healthcare growth, free from the drag of all those chemical liabilities.
Exactly. It's a way to unlock market value by separating the future from the past.
And this means major operational hubs, like their largest healthcare-focused plant in Brookings, South Dakota, will now fall under the Solventum umbrella.
That's right. That plant manufactures over 1,700 different healthcare products and employs 1,100 people. The final separation is a multi-step process, expected to be completed in 2024.
This era of massive change is often accompanied by shifts at the very top, and we saw a major leadership change recently.
We did. In March 2024, 3M announced the appointment of William Bill Brown as Chief Executive Officer, effective May 2024. He succeeded Michael Roman, who remained as Executive Chairman.
And Brown comes from outside 3M.
Yes, he previously led L3 Harris Technologies. Bringing in an external leader for the CEO role often signals that the board is seeking a fresh perspective and perhaps a more aggressive approach to navigating these staggering legal and strategic hurdles.
The ultimate hurdle they face, of course, is that chemical legacy, the permanence problem, which requires not just restructuring, but a fundamental environmental commitment.
And this is where we see a fascinating paradox. 3M actually has a long history of being proactive on environmental issues, dating all the way back to 1975.
When they established the legendary Pollution Prevention Pays program, the 3P program.
That's the one. That program was remarkably forward-thinking for the mid-1970s.
How did it work, and what were the results?
The 3P program was focused on source reduction preventing pollution before it even required treatment. It encouraged chemists and engineers to redesign products, modify processes, and reuse waste materials. It was later expanded in 1989 to promote recycling and waste reduction company-wide.
And the economic results were concrete? They were real?
Oh, very real. By the early 1990s, the program had generated about 2,500 projects that decreased the company's total global pollutant generation by 50%. Critically, it saved 3M an estimated $500 to $600 million by eliminating the production of waste that would otherwise require costly treatment.
It successfully proved that being green could also be profitable, at least for manageable, visible pollutants.
But here's the paradox. How did this highly successful, decades-long culture of pollution prevention pays utterly fail to detect or mitigate the catastrophic, invisible, and long-term threat of PFAS?
That's a great question.
I think the 3P program was highly effective at eliminating large volumes of visible waste, like solvents or heavy metals. The problem with PFAS was its very nature, chemically stable, invisible, and incorporated into the product's function.
So the initial oversight was assuming that a small amount of a chemically inert processing aid would just dissipate.
Rather than accumulate over decades due to its absolute persistence. The scale of the PFAS liability proves that their internal environmental controls, successful as they were for traditional pollution, were just insufficient for this revolutionary persistent chemistry.
The current PFAS crisis demanded a far more definitive commitment than the 3P program could offer.
It demanded a complete exit. 3M has set a definitive 2025 deadline to stop producing and using all PFAS, the forever chemicals, worldwide.
And this commitment is a response not just to the lawsuits, but to increasing regulatory pressure from governments all over the world.
Yes, including the Netherlands, the United States, and the European Union, who are actively considering comprehensive bans on these substances.
Beyond PFAS, 3M still has a massive industrial footprint to manage. What are their broader future environmental goals?
They have defined aggressive carbon goals. They're aiming for a 50% emissions reduction by 2030 using a 2019 baseline, and they're committing to achieving carbon neutrality across their operations by 2050.
Which demonstrates a comprehensive effort to address their environmental operational footprint while simultaneously dismantling their involvement with these persistent legacy chemicals.
To truly grasp the complexity of meeting these goals while managing a $24 billion company, you really need to understand the vast physical infrastructure 3M operates globally.
The network is truly immense.
It is. They operate 80 manufacturing facilities spread across 29 U.S. states, and they have an additional 125 manufacturing and converting facilities in 37 countries outside the U.S. This isn't just one or two massive hubs. It's a decentralized, intricate web of production.
Can we use a few examples to illustrate the varying roles of these facilities?
Sure. Take the Cynthiana, Kentucky plant. This single facility is where their iconic consumer products originate. It produces 672 different stock-keeping units, or SKUs, of Post-it notes alone,
672 kinds of Post-it notes.
and 147 SKUs of Scotch tape. This plant is a consumer product engine. Then you have specialized hubs, like the Brookings, South Dakota plant, the one moving to Solventum, which is 3M's largest facility focused purely on healthcare, manufacturing over 1,700 different products.
And how about their international footprint? What's a good example there?
Singapore serves as their major Southeast Asian base, where they've invested heavily over 5 decades. This includes a facility in Tuas, a manufacturing plant and smart urban solutions lab in Woodlands, and a customer technical center in Yixin.
And China is also a major base of operations.
A huge one. 3M has operated there since 1984 and was Shanghai's first wholly foreign-owned enterprise. They maintain multiple production and technology centers, including one dedicated to healthcare products in Shanghai and another for renewable energy components in Hefei.
That geographic scope and product diversity really reinforce the central tension we've been exploring. How a company built on brilliant, fast-moving, decentralized innovation suddenly faces massive, slow-moving, centralized liabilities that threaten the entire structure.
So if we synthesize 3M's story, what stands out is this profound paradox of modern industrial success. This is a company built on a series of accidental, highly successful inventions, from high-performance chemicals like PFOA that revolutionized surfaces.
To simple breakthroughs like the Post-it note that revolutionized organization.
Yet that exact chemical foundation, that mastery of material science, has resulted in multi-billion-dollar litigation regarding the long-term, unintended, catastrophic consequences of its own foundational products.
So for you, the learner, understanding 3M means recognizing that the complex trade-offs inherent in modern innovation are not theoretical. They're manifested in enormous, measurable financial costs.
The speed and excitement of solving a problem with a revolutionary sticky or non-stick solution often come with a slow, toxic price tag decades later. A price tag that requires colossal capital, $16.3 billion, and counting, to mitigate the damage.
Corporate stability in this era is not just about quarterly earnings and patent filings. It is profoundly linked to managing the unknown long-term environmental permanence of the materials that make modern convenience possible.
This company must now actively dismantle and clean up the chemical legacy that once defined its competitive edge.
Which leads us to a final provocative thought to consider. 3M, the company that invented the adhesive note, an indispensable tool designed for temporary information, for lists that fade and reminders that expire,
is currently dealing with the ultimate problem of permanence, the forever chemicals.
What does this constant cycle of brilliant innovation and subsequent massive multi-decade liability tell us about how companies, and more importantly governments, should approach the testing, regulation, and ultimate accountability for revolutionary new materials that, by their very design, resist the natural process of decomposition?
It raises the question of whether our regulatory framework has kept pace with the sheer stability of modern chemistry.
A question that future innovators and lawmakers will certainly need to answer in the billions. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.